All right, here we go. Hello, travelers. Welcome to Reach the World's Explorer program. For over 20 years, Reach the World has inspired youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens through virtual exchange. My name is Tim, and I'm so glad you're joining us for today's live stream event. Today, we're talking with explorer, educator, and conservationist Lizzie Rosenberger. Lizzie has participated in expeditions around the world, including a mission aboard NASA's Sophia Airborne Observatory, and she uses those experiences in the field to inform and inspire her science students in Massachusetts. Lizzie's joining us today as part of Reach the World's ongoing virtual exchange with extraordinary female members of the Explorers Club. You can read Lizzie's article about her work and meet more of the women at the forefront of discovery worldwide by visiting athome.reachtheworld.org/explore. I also want to welcome the teachers and students who are joining us live today. Please feel free to use the YouTube chat bar to let us know you're here, where you're joining from, and of course, to share any questions you have for Lizzie as we go. We'll get to as many questions as we can in the next 45 minutes or so. And with that, it's time to embark on a virtual exchange expedition with Lizzie. Lizzie, welcome to Reach the World.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here. So what I thought I would do today is focus on kind of my own journey through education and exploration and my journey as an educator. So to get started, here we go. Let me just present so you can see the whole thing. All right, I'm going to start with a map because I love to have everyone get an idea of exactly where I'm talking about and where I've been. You'll notice there are a bunch of different dots on the map, and those are all the places that I'm going to talk about today, some with a little bit more detail and some briefly. We're going to start over with kind of the dark purpley ones up in this area, and that is where I was born and grew up. So to start with, this is a picture of where my interest in exploration and the outdoors started. So on the left over here, you'll see a little creek. This is a creek in Bethesda, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. And I lived there until I was 6, and I would often leave my house, walk down the street, and play for hours in the park and turn over rocks and see what was underneath them. My older sister and brother often had to come get me and convince me to come home. When I was 6, we moved to New Hampshire, to Concord, New Hampshire, and I was a little concerned there wouldn't be as much nature accessible to me, but I was definitely wrong. There was a lot. So what was really impactful to me was the New Hampshire Audubon Society. That was located really close to my house, and I would go to summer camp there. This picture at the bottom is their new and improved center they built a couple of years back. It looks different from when I was little, but it's a wonderful place that they have lots of plants and animals and areas to explore. And then this picture in the middle is of kind of when you get to a trailhead, what you might see, the map that tells you where you're going to go, the different precautions of what you might need to look out for. Tick season, usually there's an announcement about ticks. So we would often go run around in the different trails and forests near my house in New Hampshire and again, continue to explore. So from there, I was fortunate enough in high school to have an opportunity to go over to Mexico. So if we think over here, I was in high school and then popped down to this green dot down here. This is Baja California Sur. So it's a little peninsula. And here I got the opportunity to work with a family friend and be her research assistant. So this is Louise Brooks Nelson, and she was doing a master's program on Eastern green Pacific sea turtles, and specifically looking at their foraging patterns and their migrations. So we would put out a net in the middle of the ocean. We would catch turtles, bring them back to our beach lab area, and then we would weigh them and measure them and attach a little tracker to the back of their shells. It would be somewhere right about here. We didn't track all the turtles that we captured because you have to make sure they're a certain size in order to be tracked, but we tracked a lot of them. And so we would then release them back into the water. for them to go back and swim. So this is us releasing a turtle back in, gosh, probably 2000, the year 2000. And once we released them, we would then get into a sea kayak and we would paddle next to the turtle. So attached to the tracker here would be a fishing line. And on the end of the fishing line was a little buoy with a flag. And so we would sit there and paddle behind the buoy in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, trying to follow this sea turtle. We would follow them during the day. We would follow them at night. And from that, I learned a lot from Louise and from the other expedition members about what it's like to be in the middle of the ocean in the middle of the night, and also what to do if perhaps you lose the sea turtle. We had these devices that's called telemetry, where you can use radio waves to make sure if you lose the sea turtle, you can actually find it again. And I'll show you some of that a little bit later. The sea turtle is one of my favorite animals, and you'll see on the right-hand side, these are two images from just a year and a half ago in 2019 in Hawaii off the coast of Maui, where I was leading a National Geographic student expedition, and my co-leader is a photographer, and I always followed the sea turtles. And so here's a tiny little picture of me following a sea turtle a little bit of a different way than I did when I was in high school. But through this, I also had the opportunity to teach students about sea turtles as well. This is a little bit of a blurry picture. These are a little bit old. This is in college. In college, I went to Colorado College, and we had the opportunity to do a lot of field research as part of our coursework. So for me, it was perfect. This is a picture of us collecting tree core samples. We did a research project on, does the pine tree, why does it grow in the middle of the rocks? So you can barely see in this picture, we're kind of camouflaged up here, us on the hillside of a place called Garden of the Gods that has all this beautiful red sandstone, and there are trees growing out of the rocks. And we thought that was kind of weird. How did the tree roots, how were they able to grow in the rocks and not just soil? So we decided to do a research project on it. So this is us doing core samples and boring into the tree. And then this is one of my friends who was working on the project with me, and she's looking at this thing in her hand, which is the core sample, and counting how many rings are there so we can see how old the tree is. In college, this was just one of the many programs that I was able to be a part of, the different research opportunities. We also got out into the mountains. So this is out in the mountains of Crested Butte. And this is there's a theme you'll read in my article about looking at the nighttime sky. And this is one of those instances where I was up in the mountains and looked at how clear and beautiful the sky was and kind of wondering, why did I see so many stars here? So these are just some pictures of out exploring the mountains of Colorado. And the next place that we are going to go is where I did my study abroad. So I had the opportunity during college to take a semester and head over to Kenya, so all the way over here. And once there, I researched wildlife. So the whole program was about wildlife. This is a picture of some elephants. One of the research projects that I was able to work on was all about elephants. And we were looking at kind of who was more destructive. Was it the elephants or the humans to the vegetation? This picture is of a certain group of elephants in a national park called the Tsavo West National Park. And it's pretty dry in this area. But I wanted to give you a vision of sort of what a herd of elephants looks like down there. What we were doing on our project is we were walking transects. So a transect, if you think about a football field is 100 yards and it's a straight field. So a transect, we were doing about 100-yard transect, so about the size of a football field, just kind of a rectangle going down into the environment. So we had a starting point and an end point. What we would do when we walked down that transect is that we would look for elephant dung. We would look for different woody vegetation. So we would look for, are there trees? Are the trees uprooted? If there's a tree, are there scrape marks on the bark? and see from all of those if we could tell, are the scrape marks on the bark, is that from a machete that maybe a Kenyan was using? Or does it look more like it's a tusk mark and the elephants were scraping their tusks on it? So this picture, you can see some of my co-workers, my co-students that are walking down the transects looking for, this is a little pile of elephant dung. So we would take in the data for all of this. And then at the end, we compiled all of our data. And to be honest with you, it was pretty inconclusive. The elephants were destructive and the humans were destructive to the plants. So it was kind of an interesting thing to find out. But this is where we had one moment that was probably one of my most memorable experiences in Kenya and one of my most terrifying. So we have this elephant here, and this elephant, this is kind of a close-up, dark, blurry shot of him. But the reason for that is because he was a little bit further away from us. Our vehicle, where we had been, every place you go when you do a study, you want to map where you've been. So we forgot one day to take our GPS coordinates of where we were. So we had to go back afterwards and take those GPS coordinates. Now, while we were there, it had just rained. And once it rained, it became really muddy. And our Land Cruiser got stuck in the mud. So here's, oh, hold on. Well, maybe the Land Cruiser didn't make it, but there's a picture of a Land Cruiser, and it kind of looks like a big green box. And out the top of the box, the roof opens up and you stand up on the seats and look out the top through the roof to see what's around you. That's how we did most of our surveying. So we were stuck in the mud, and we figured while we were stuck and trying to get out, we might as well look out and see what was around. And we saw this elephant that was a little bit in the distance. And it was a big elephant. Kind of a teenager elephant that was in must, which just means that they're a little bit angry and irritable. And he was hanging out far enough away from us. And then all of a sudden, he started to walk closer to our Land Cruiser and closer. And our intern at the time, who was a local Kenyan, told all of us to get into the Land Cruiser and not move. And we thought, I wonder why. Meanwhile, the elephant is still walking closer and closer, and the elephant eventually comes right next to our Land Cruiser. It's maybe a foot away from us, and its trunk is kind of going up and down and trying to get into our windows that we had just closed and trying to see what is going on. And in the back of our Land Cruiser, our Kenyan intern and guide started to pray. And we were kind of thinking, oh my goodness, if he's starting to pray, this might be kind of serious. So we all stayed frozen, stayed put, didn't do anything. And then eventually the elephant took a few steps back, and then came to the back of our Land Cruiser. And again, kind of sniffed, and he fluffed his ears up and down. And then after what felt like an eternity, but was maybe only 10 minutes, he walked away into the back, kind of behind our area. At that point, our vehicle was still stuck in the mud, and our intern and local guide told us all to get out of the Land Cruiser and run as fast as we could. So it turns out that if you are further than 100 meters from an elephant, a human can outrun an elephant. But if you're closer than 100 meters, you cannot outrun the elephant. The elephant will come and get you. So what we found out later when we finally made it to safety was that the elephant was looking at our Land Cruiser and thinking it was a toy, and kind of thinking that, oh, I wonder how I could flip this over, how I could turn it, what I could do with it, and kind of play with us, which, as you can imagine, would not be good for us. So this is a picture of us afterwards, after we had sprinted out of our Land Cruiser and made it to the other half of our group's Land Cruiser and into safety after the elephant. You can see we're pretty excited here after our big run. But that was a moment for me that I thought, you never know what wildlife might do.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
So from here, I wanted to show you a few other just animals that we saw in Kenya that maybe people don't think of as wildlife in Africa. Here are some bats that are up underneath the thatch of a roof, warthogs, which are my personal favorite. And then this one up here is a dung beetle. And dung beetles are really fun. They make balls of dung that they roll around. So from here, we also had an opportunity to interact with students that were over in Kenya. So these were just a couple of the students that we got to play games with. They told us stories about their lives, and we told them what we'd been learning, and we could swap stories about the wildlife in the area. And then this is a picture of the moon as well. So you can see just how dark it is at the nighttime sky, and kind of this beautiful beauty of the sky out in Kenya. Now, from here, this was in my other class in college. I had the opportunity to study the tropical and coral reef ecology of Belize. So these are 3 pictures of when I was studying in Belize. And here are my classmates. We're all looking for scarlet macaws out in the forest through our binoculars. And then this picture up here is the leafcutter ant. I love finding the small insects that you can and small animals and seeing what they contribute. So here you can see the shreds where they've taken apart the leaves and then they carry them back to their nests. I thought that was fascinating. And then this is a picture of a cabin at this place called Coxcombs Wildlife Basin. And this is again in probably 2002. And I had an opportunity to come back with students of my own to this very same cabin in about 2018. So all through college, I was lucky enough to have these fantastic opportunities to do my own learning of field research and be actually in the field practicing research and wildlife conservation. So from there, I thought to myself, what am I going to do after college? And that's when I ended up heading over to Australia. So over here, way up here, this is far north Queensland in Australia, this green dot, and that's where we're going to head next. So this was the rainforest. I lived in the rainforest of Australia for 2 years. This picture on the left-hand side is what our driveway looked like. We had a 2-kilometer dirt road just through the woods to get to our center where we worked and lived. And this picture in the middle is to show that it really does rain a lot in the rainforest. So this is during the wet season, just a normal rainstorm that came through, and you can see just how heavy the rains can be. And then this picture on the right is where we would do our eating. So we had a little grassy area. All along the back area is all rainforest. And then this is our classroom was in the back here. We have our kitchen in the middle, and then where we would eat kind of all outside in the rainforest. So here is where I got to do a little bit of my own learning and some teaching as well. So there were students who came to study abroad here, and one kind of research project I want to share with you is about bats. So this is some of the students in what we call our lab, where we were doing research on cane toads, and we were dissecting cane toads to see what was inside them, to see what they were eating. Turns out they ate a lot of stones, but they pretty much eat everything imaginable. So we were teaching students kind of some dissection techniques. And then these are microbats. So this is where I got really excited about a project that we were working on. The professor that I was working with was a woman named Jess Wallace, and she had studied microbats in New Zealand and was studying them in Australia as well. So these are microbats. You can see kind of by the size of our hand here, just how small they actually are. So these, I think they're adorable. Not everyone might agree with me, but I think they're absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to show you a little bit about kind of how we studied them and what we were studying and why. So this is what our van looked like, all of our equipment that we needed to go out and research these bats. There's a lot of different types of stuff. You can see some walkie-talkies, you can see some GPSs, there's a compass in case we got lost, bug spray was important, clippers. So what we were looking at was, how did the bats eat? How and what did they eat? Their foraging patterns. And did they like to eat things? Did they like to fly around in areas that had lots of trees, or did they prefer a nice clear pathway? We were also wondering the wings of the bat. does their wing shape and size make a difference in how they forage and how they find their food? So we first started out by setting up some nets. This is something that's called a harp net. And it's a harp net because you can kind of see the reflection right here. These are all really thin nylon pieces, kind of like fishing wire, and they come down in two sections, kind of like a harp if you were to string a harp. So what happens here is you put this in a flyway, and then if the bats come in and fly into it, they get kind of confused that they're in this harp, and then they sink down into this canvas part back here. Once they're down in the canvas, they're able to come to the bottom and climb up underneath. There's a little flap, and they climb up underneath the flap and hang out kind of in the corners all together to keep each other nice and warm. So when you have a harp net out, you set it up during the day so you can see what you're doing. And then once it's set up, you go back and check it about every hour or so, because you want to make sure that if you do capture any bats, you don't want them in there overnight because they might get too cold and hungry. So these are two different places we set them up. This one was outside of a tunnel, underneath a tunnel. There was a roosting site where bats spend their day underneath here. And then this one was in a forest. This is a picture of us checking it to make sure that everything's fine. We put up this tarp on the top of it for rain purposes. So if it was raining at night, we didn't want the rain to get all the way down into this catch basin where the bats were. We also set up light traps. So these are light traps to figure out what are the insects and what are the bats hoping to eat. So this is a picture of the light traps before they went out. And then this kind of bluish hue is what it looks like in the dark when we're hoping to attract the light, the bugs. And then after we catch a bat, we had to do some processing. The first thing we would do is give them a snack. So you'll see there's this eyedropper here, and we're giving them some sugar water so that they have some energy back into them. And here you can see me giving them some sugar water. And then this is Jess Wallace, whose research was the primary investigator. And then these are two students watching to learn how to do it. And then in the next consecutive nights, they get to feed them themselves. Here are some more pictures of pulling out one of the bat's wings to take a picture of the wing structure. And then we also use calipers to see how big the bat is, their body size, and then we also weigh them. And this one, we also did some radio tracking on these bats because we wanted to see where exactly were they going once they leave the roost. So once they leave the roost and they go out to forage, where are they going? In order to do that, we attached right here, you can see kind of a long tail coming off. That's the radio tag. So we would radio tag the bat, and then we would send them back out. When we send them back out, this is the radio telemetry, same thing we used with the sea turtles. And you can see you hold up this part here that connects the radio waves, and then you listen for clicks. And depending on how close you are to the bat, the clicks will change. And with using that, you can then triangulate. You can kind of make a triangle between how many different places you saw that you heard the clicks, and then figure out exactly where the bat had been. So this is a picture of where our little bat went. So you can see these places where there's a lot of trees. These are where they ended up flying the most. Oops, sorry. This area is kind of interesting. There was a tiny little pocket of trees there, but not a lot. And then there's trees all over here. And this is an open area, kind of like a farm area. So we found out that they didn't forage only in the forest or only in the open space. They kind of did a mixture of both, but tended to stay a little bit closer to their roosts. My favorite part of this whole project was that each student, we had 8 students who worked with us on this project, and each of them came up with a different research question, and we all used the same data that we all collected together, and then they each were answering a different question based on what they were most interested in. So from the same data, you can really find out a lot of different answers to some questions. So from here, we're going to dive into the Sophia. So that was, I spent a couple of years in Australia, loved my time over in Australia and did a lot of other expeditions there. I learned a lot, did a lot of helping educate other students. And then I came back to the US and got my degree in teaching and started being a teacher myself. And that's where I ended up living in New York City and had the opportunity to be an amateur astronomy ambassador with the Sophia. So now we're going to come over here to this purple dot in Palmdale, California. And that's where we meet the Sophia, this flying observatory. So this is a total shift from wildlife. This is my love and passion for space and for the stars. And you'll see here this, I love this picture of the Sophia because you can see it flying over pretty much the desert, but also you can see the telescope here. And this is one of the rare pictures that they have because they generally only open this garage door at nighttime. So this is a door, it actually closes. And once they get up to flying altitude and it's dark, they open this just like a garage and then the telescope appears. And the Sophia is really interesting. It's part of NASA, but it's also part of the DLR, which is the German space agency. So you'll notice over here, there's both an American flag and a German flag, and both countries help fund the program and have access to the telescope. So kind of to break down the Sophia, it stands for the Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy. And what do all of those things mean? So the stratosphere is a layer in our atmosphere. So there's different layers in the atmosphere. We are down here in the troposphere. That's kind of where we are, what we breathe. And then next comes up to the stratosphere. Hot air balloons fly up here, weather balloons. There's some airplanes that can go up into the stratosphere. The mesosphere comes next. There's a lot of comets there. The thermosphere is the kind of the last piece before we get to the exosphere, which is space. And the thermosphere is where we have a bunch of satellites orbiting as well. Now, the reason why an observatory, let's go into an observatory has telescopes inside of it. And a telescope is something that makes objects far away look really close. You may have heard microscopes and telescopes. Telescopes bring small things bigger, and telescopes bring far things away up close. These are a couple of different telescopes that you might use down here on Earth. This is a picture of Mauna Kea Observatory in Hawaii. And these are all observatories here, and these open up and there's a telescope inside there. And the reason they're on Mauna Kea, which is a really tall volcano in Hawaii, is because it's higher in elevation. So it's got more clear air. And then this is another telescope, a type of telescope. You may have heard of the Hubble Space Telescope. So this is a telescope that is up orbiting Earth. So this would be up in that thermosphere, exosphere area and just going around Earth. And you can kind of see the distinction here. You can see these layers of the atmosphere. So the Sophia is unique because it's the only flying observatory. If you think about it, an airplane can take off and it can land. So you can choose exactly where it goes. And when it comes back down, you can fix things. So if there's something breaks on the telescope, it's easy to fix. If you have a telescope flying in the thermosphere orbiting the Earth, it's kind of hard to get to it to fix it. If you have one that's on Earth, on Mauna Kea, for example, you can fix it pretty easily, but you can't get kind of above the stratosphere. And what's important about that is that there's different water molecules. So there's different types of light as well. And as our atmosphere kind of expands and as the layers grow of our atmosphere, there's different amounts of light that can be let into them, and there's different amounts of water molecules. So down here, kind of at sea level, where we have our mountaintops, there's still quite a few water molecules. Once you get up past the mountains and up into the stratosphere, the water molecules are much fewer. So that means you have a nice clear view out into space. So to go over some of these types of light, there's this wonderful thing called the electromagnetic spectrum. And you may have heard of radio waves and microwaves and the visible light spectrum and X-rays. So basically, they're all just different types of light. The only kind of light we can see is this visible spectrum here. What I want you to think about here, though, is these red lines that are the waves. These are the light waves. And this is what the scientists aboard the Sophia are looking for. They're looking in this infrared spectrum, and generally the far infrared spectrum. And you can see different things based on the different waves of light. So this is what Earth looks like in visible light. And then this is what it looks like in infrared. I'll show you a couple more. This is what a person looks like in visible light and someone else in infrared. And then again, this is Orion, the constellation in visible light, and Orion in the infrared. So what's important about this is that you can see different molecules that are out in space in different lines of spectra, different types of energy. So that's what they're looking for on the Sophia. This was our group of educators who were aboard the Sophia. So we have my co-worker here, Mike, who taught physics, and then Missy and Teresa, they taught physics and earth science in middle and high schools in New Jersey. So all of us had something that we were studying on the Sophia to bring back to our students. For me, I was teaching first, second, third, and fourth graders. And so my part of the mission was to ask questions of everyone that we met and ask the questions of my students. We had one day where we got to see the Sophia take off. So this is them taking off. They take off at dusk and then land in the morning because they want to view the sky at night. And then this is once we kind of get up high, you can kind of see a little bit of that delineation of the nighttime sky and the layers of the atmosphere again. This is a quick view of what it looks like inside the telescope, inside the airplane, excuse me. This here is the telescope. And what's cool about this is that this part forward, you can access when you're on board. And then this green part is kind of, they call it a pressure bulkhead, but what that means is that it's completely sealed off. So everything behind it won't affect the oxygen levels that you're able to breathe on the airplane. And that's because right here is where the door opens, and you don't want to have the door open when you're that high up. So they can equalize the pressure here. You'll see there's a lot of different consoles for different people to do their work. And then the cockpit is way up here. So some of these pictures you may see in the article, but there's a couple I wanted to highlight again. This one is in the cockpit. We got to be in the cockpit for takeoff and landing, which I found very exciting. And what's interesting is you have a pilot, a co-pilot, and a flight engineer. And you'll see in this one that all three of them are doing something. This hand here is actually the hand of the engineer. And they have some of the kind of new technologies, but there's also all these buttons that they actually rely on more so to fly the plane than the newer technologies. The reason for that is because these two people are the telescope operators. And the telescope operators, their job is to keep the telescope pointed on what they're observing. And as the airplane moves, you can imagine that the telescope also moves. So you have to keep the telescope moving on the target. So the telescope operators are actually essentially flying the airplane, because they'll radio up to the captain and say 1 degree to the right, 1 degree east. And then the captain pushes the button and they move the plane just 1 degree so that it stays locked on what they're observing. I thought that was absolutely fascinating to me of that piece. These are some of the scientists at work. And this one I wanted to point out right here. This is Rolf, and Rolf is actually this is the instrument down here that's collecting all of the data. The data that was being collected was kind of all gibbly jargon. It didn't make sense to anyone except for Rolf. And Rolf here, what he's doing is he's translating what is coming off of the telescope into usable data for the other scientists so they can understand it. So he's essentially creating his own code as the data comes in. And that's just specific to that instrument they used on our flight. But I thought that was really quite impressive to think that he's the only one who can understand it and has to translate it for everyone else to use. This is just, again, a picture when Ralph wasn't using the telescope and someone else was using it for a different project. We got to chat with him a little bit, and you can see the telescope back here, the flight, the operators of the telescope here. This, in front of these two people, are the flight directors who are in charge of everything. And then this is what we got to see, kind of the nighttime sky from the telescope. And then lastly, this is the telescope, kind of an up close view of it. This part that does the viewing, if there's turbulence, this blue part will look like it's bumping and moving around, but it's actually staying completely still, and the whole airplane is moving around it, which is also really cool and quite sophisticated, so it doesn't lose its target as well. So these are just a couple more pictures of us at work on the telescope. And a final view, as I was doing this with my students, I brought our little mascot. One of the questions that I asked at the very end of the program, at the very end of the flight, was to the pilots. My students wanted to know, do you have dogs and what are their names? And they both did. And one of them had 2 dogs. And it just was such a nice reminder to me that these scientists they've got a lot of genius to them of what they're doing, but they also are just like you and me and have pets of their own as well. And then just a final thoughts and a few things to wrap us up. A lot of my life has been about education and educating the next generation and telling people stories and things I see along the way. These are pictures of one of my first group of students that I led as an educator, and we were up in Alaska and on a glacier hike. So just some pictures of my students there. And then here again, glacier hiking in New Zealand. And then this picture is that same place in Belize that I went as a student. I was able to bring my own students back to about 10 years later. And it's wonderful to me to see how the environment changes and how sometimes it is quite the same. This is a personal expedition. On the right-hand side, this is in Cambodia at a couple of temples. This is the temple that is thought to have filmed Indiana Jones. And this picture on the left is me there in around 2008. And then this picture on the right is the same temple, slightly different angle, but same temple, same tree in 2019 when I was on an expedition with the Explorers Club that was featured on Reach the World. So you can see kind of the difference of the pictures. A little bit of the infrastructure has changed. You can't go right up to the tree any longer, but it's still pretty similar. And I encourage you to check out that expedition as well, the expedition on the Mekong River in Cambodia with Reach the World. And then lastly, this is just me today, still out there exploring and trying to get out into my backyard as much as I can. This was just these past 2 weeks, I was able to get out and enjoy some of the snow, and wherever I am, I'm curious. So this picture in the middle is some ice, and there's melting ice, and then this part is really green, and as I got closer to it, it was even a brighter green, and I was kind of curious, why is it this color green? Or is it algae? Is there something underneath it? So anyways, just out exploring. These 2 hikes I did with my father. And whenever I see something, I also say to him, what do you think this is? Or get his ideas. So I guess to wrap up, thinking of ways that you can get out and explore in your own backyard, and always question and wonder what you're looking at, and then share that with others as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lizzie. What a great presentation. You're such an educator. You've answered every single question I could think of along the way before I had a chance to ask it to you. It's so great to hear about your experiences and your expeditions. I feel like you personify this thing that we try to share with students this explorer mindset. I think you said the word curious about 100 times in the last 30 some minutes. And that curiosity clearly has driven you to do some incredible things and still drives you today. We have just a few minutes left, actually. I wanted to just share one question with you specifically around you being an explorer and an educator. And that is for all the students who are watching, or all the students who will see this recording after we're finished here today. What advice do you have for young people who can maybe can recognize that curiosity about the world around them, and how can they have great expeditions and do amazing things like you have?
Yeah, I think that the first piece is to be curious. So look at things and wonder and ask questions. And then once you see something that you're kind of curious about or interested in, follow that passion. I think it's also important to share with other people what you're interested in. So if you're really interested in alligators, start talking about alligators with other people and see what other people know about alligators. Do your own research on those alligators, and then find organizations that maybe you could volunteer with, or that you could maybe get an internship or a job with, so that you can get into kind of that field yourself. But I think that, I mean, yes, curious is probably one of my favorite words, but I think that just asking the questions and keeping an open mind and seeing where different opportunities lead you, I think is really important. And I do think for students in particular, ask anyone the questions. You never know what someone might know or have experience with that you wouldn't expect. So kind of stay curious and ask the questions, and you never know where it might lead you.
Okay, excellent. We have a student question here that I want to share with you too before we go. Mac, thank you so much for writing in from Ohio. Mac is wondering, if you could explore and research anywhere in the world, where would you go and what would you study? Good question.
Ooh, that's such a tough one. I would say my number one top thing and place I would want to go and study is Antarctica. And I would want to go to Antarctica for a variety of reasons. But I would love to see the interaction of the animals. I would love to see the ice and the different formations of the ice. I'd love to see kind of underwater. I think the food chain that's there. I think the pristine environment that Antarctica is. And I also secretly would love to see how they land airplanes in Antarctica. I think that's one of would be one of my highlights. But I think I would study just about anything I could in Antarctica. And then, gosh, I would literally love to study anything in the world. I think that there's so many things that are interesting. And there's new things that pop up all the time for me as well. I sometimes think about current events that I hear about. So for example, the forest fires that we were having in California over the summer, and then thinking about forest fires that they have in Australia, and kind of comparing and contrasting the effect of fires and fire management, I think is really quite interesting. So I'd love to study that as well. Oh, the possibilities are endless, but top would be Antarctica.
Well, excellent. That's a good preview too for anyone who hasn't read your article yet. As part of this virtual exchange, there's a little bit of a hint as to what one of Lizzie's next career turns could be in the world of firefighting. So if you haven't already read the article, make sure you check it out. I'm gonna, we have another student question. I'm just gonna ask it as long as we have you here. Mac is also wondering, if you could, would you travel to space? And what would you take the opportunity to be an astronaut?
Absolutely. Yep. I think you'll see it in my article as well. But what got me into the whole Sophia expedition was I was at a science teachers conference, and I went by the NASA booth because you have to. NASA is just awesome. And they gave me a sticker, and the question was, do you want to go to space? And I said, yes, my fourth graders all want to come as well. And they said, well, we can't take you all there, but we can get you pretty close. So Mac, yes, absolutely. I would go to space in a heartbeat. I'm not sure that I would go. I have a debate with one of my students all the time if we would go to Mars. I'm not sure I'm there yet. I would want to be able to come back safely and know that I could return to Earth. But yes, I would love to go to space.
Excellent. You're just such a good example of asking questions about something you're curious about. And sometimes the answer is no, we can't get you there. But sometimes the answer is yes, we can take you pretty close to space, and you make it happen. So that's great advice for all students anywhere, especially if you're interested in being an explorer yourself. Lizzie, it's been such a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing those great stories. I want to thank our entire YouTube live stream audience for joining us as well. Be sure to visit the Women of the Explorers Club Virtual Exchange homepage. You can read Lizzie's outstanding article, read more about her mission with Sophia, see some more pictures of Lizzie doing field work, and also meet more inspiring female explorers. Some great stories on there. I highly recommend it. And for a complete listing of any upcoming Reach the World events, you can always visit athome.reachtheworld.org. Lizzie, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Tim.